Henry's lucky day. The winter holidays were coming and a thick blanket of snow covered the Island of Sodor. Snowdrifts blocked the lines and the tracks were very slippery. The engines felt frozen from their funnels to their footplates. But Henry puffed happily through the snowy countryside. None of his lines were blocked. "You are the only engines who have made your deliveries on time today," chuffed Thomas. "You must have lucky trucks." Henry saw that none of the other engines were back. "Maybe you're right. Maybe I do have lucky trucks," he puffed. That night, when the engines were all asleep, Henry thought how pleased he was to have lucky trucks. "Now I will always be on time," puffed Henry. "And that means I can be a really useful engine." But the next morning, when Henry went to the yard, his lucky trucks weren't there. "Oh no," chuffed Henry. "Where are my lucky trucks?" "Edward took them," puffed Thomas. "He needed trucks to take coal to the villagers." The Fat Controller arrived at the yard. "Henry, I've got a very important special for you," said the Fat Controller. "A delivery of presents has arrived at the airport. You must collect them and take them to the children in the villages." Henry puffed to the airport. But soon he was in trouble. Gordon's hill was very icy. Every time Henry tried to puff up the hill, he slid back down again. "I need my lucky trucks back," Henry huffed. "I can't make my deliveries without them." "Must find Edward, chuffed Henry. Then a snowslide came down and blocked Henry's way. "Oh no," puffed Henry. "If I had my lucky trucks, this would never have happened." Henry puffed up the line. He saw pipes across the track. They were blocking his way. "I thought you were collecting trucks of presents," chuffed Molly. "You're supposed to be at the airport," snorted James. "Edward has my lucky trucks," whistled Henry. "I must find him." "Don't worry," called Rocky. "I'll have the line cleared in no time." Henry waited sadly as Rocky lifted the pipes from the tracks. Then he chuffed on to find Edward and his lucky trucks. But every way that Henry chuffed, there were more delays. "Sorry," puffed Thomas. "It has taken me a long time to clear this line." "It's not your fault," Henry wished. "I need to find Edward and my lucky trucks." And Henry puffed sadly away. Henry couldn't find Edward anywhere. "I'll never see my lucky trucks again," he sighed. But when he puffed into the frosty forest, there was Edward with Henry's lucky trucks. "I've found you!" Henry chuffed excitedly, but he puffed too quickly. His wheels slid on the icy tracks, and he biffed right into his lucky trucks. "Oh no, I've broken my lucky trucks," groaned Henry. He sat sadly in the snow. "I'm not going anywhere without my lucky trucks," huffed Henry. "But they're broken," chuffed Edward. And if you don't collect the presents soon, the children won't have anything to open in the morning. Henry thought about how sad the children would be. I have to get to the airport somehow, puffed Henry, even without my lucky trucks. So Henry chuffed away to the airport. The tracks were clear now, and the more Henry thought about the children, the less he thought about his lucky trucks. Henry puffed up Gordon's Hill. The track was very icy. His wheels started to spin, but Henry puffed harder and harder. He inched his way over the top of the hill. Soon, Henry arrived at the airport. He collected the presents and puffed across the island, making his deliveries. Now, Henry didn't think about his lucky trucks once. All he could think about was delivering the presents on time. Children were waiting at the station. "Good old Henry!" they cheered. Henry felt very proud. And he steamed along the track. "Only one more delivery," puffed Henry. With or without his lucky trucks, Henry knew he mustn't let the children down. "I've delivered all the presents," chuffed Henry happily. "And without my lucky trucks. Maybe the trucks weren't so lucky after all." But when Henry saw the children's smiling faces, he knew he was still the luckiest engine. Thomas and the Storyteller. It was an important day on the Island of Sodor. A new library was going to be opened. Everyone was excited. There was going to be a ceremony with a brass band, a red carpet, and boxes of books. All the children and all the grown-ups loved reading books and listening to stories. A famous storyteller was going to tell the children a special story. All the engines wanted to collect the famous storyteller, but the Fat Controller chose Thomas. Thomas was excited. "You must show the famous storyteller the special sights of Sodor. Then she can make up a special story. She must arrive at the grand opening on time." "Yes, sir," tooted Thomas excitedly. "I know all the best sights." Thomas puffed over to Brendam Docks. He wanted to do a good job. Thomas arrived at the docks. He looked all around for someone famous, but all he could see was a lady with a notepad and a big box of biscuits. "Are you the famous storyteller?" Thomas asked. "I like to think so," said the lady. "You must be Thomas the Tank Engine. Will you please show me the sights of Sodor?" "Of course," tooted Thomas happily. So the famous storyteller hopped on to Thomas's footplate, and Thomas puffed away. "Pirates' Cove is not far from here. I shall take you there first," whistled Thomas. Pirates' Cove was full of caves and secret tunnels. Legend had it that pirates used to bury their treasure there. "You could make up a jolly good story about pirate treasure," wished Thomas happily. But on his way there, Thomas saw James. James was in trouble. "My coupling rod has snapped and I'm a guaranteed connection. My passengers have to arrive at Maithwaite Station on time." "I'm sorry," Thomas puffed to the famous storyteller. "I cannot take you to Pirates' Cove. I have to help my friend." So Thomas buffered up to James and his passenger train and chuffed away. "Thank you, Thomas," cried James. Thomas arrived at Maithwaite just in time. "The ruined castle is just over the hill," said Thomas to the famous storyteller. "Now I will take you there." Thomas puffed as fast as he could. The ruined castle had tall turrets and a great big door. The old kings and queens of Sodor used to live there. "You could make up a jolly good story about kings and queens," puffed Thomas happily. But on his way there, Thomas saw Emily in a siding. She was looking sad. She was taking flour to the bakery, but her whistle had broken. It wasn't safe to work without it. "I'm sorry," puffed Thomas to the famous storyteller. "I cannot take you to the ruined castle. I have to help my friend." So Thomas buffered up to Emily and took her to the bakery. "Thank you, Thomas," cried Emily. Thomas arrived at the bakery just in time. Emily was pleased, and Thomas puffed away. "Misty Valley is not far from here," chuffed Thomas. "Now I will take you there." He had heard Misty Valley was full of magic. "You could make up a jolly good story about magic," puffed Thomas. But on his way, Thomas saw Percy. A river had flooded its banks. Percy was up to his buffers in water, and his firebox had gone out. "I'm sorry," whistled Thomas to the famous storyteller. "I cannot take you to Misty Valley. I have to help my friend." Thomas chuffed into the water. The water came right up to his footplate. The famous storyteller had to stand on her box of biscuits to keep her feet dry. Thomas bravely buffered up to Percy, and he pushed his friend out. "Thank you, Thomas," cried Percy. But now it was time to go to the grand opening, and Thomas was late. "Cinders and ashes," wished Thomas. "I haven't had time to show any sights at all." Thomas arrived at the new library station. The fat controller was waiting. "We didn't visit any sights," puffed Thomas sadly. "I had to take James's passengers to Maithwaite Station, Emily's flour to the bakery, and pull Percy out of the water." "But it's a wonderful idea for a story," cried the famous storyteller. "I shall write all about your day, Thomas, and how you helped your friends." She was very excited. She cut the red ribbon in front of the new library and declared it open. Then the children and the engines all listened as the famous storyteller told them the story of her wonderful adventures with Thomas and his friends on the magical island of Sodor. Hector the Horrid. Thomas the Tank Engine enjoys shunting troublesome trucks. He can biff them harder and faster than any other engine. It's one of his favourite jobs. One morning, the Fat Controller had an important announcement. "James and Edward must take extra deliveries of coal," he boomed. "Thomas, you must shunt and fill trucks at the coaling plant. James and Edward, you must collect them this afternoon," he added. Thomas was very pleased. Just then, Bill and Ben chuffed by. Between them was a big black truck. It was biffing and bashing the little engines. "What are you two doing?" tooted Thomas. Bill and Ben told him they were delivering the truck to the coaling plant. Why does it need 2 engines to deliver 1 truck? Asked Thomas. Because he really doesn't like to be shunted, chuffed Ben. His name is Hector, huffed Bill. But we call him Hector the Horrid. Bill and Ben chuffed slowly away with Hector. He does look troublesome, huffed James. Troublesome trucks don't worry me, boasted Thomas. I could biff him firmly into place. Later, Thomas chuffed into the coaling plant. And there was Hector. The other trucks giggled and laughed. Big, bad, strong and solid. That truck's name is Hector Horrid, they sang. Thomas puffed closer. Keep away, roared Hector. Bill and Ben were right, thought Thomas. Hector is scary and Hector is horrid. Thomas decided to keep away. Thomas spent the morning shunting the other trucks and filling them with coal. All the time, Thomas could feel Hector the Horrid watching him. The plant manager came to see Thomas. We need an extra large delivery, he said, so Rosie is coming to help you. You must shunt and fill Hector, then add him to the back of James's train, he told Thomas. Later, Rosie puffed into the yard. She saw Hector. Do we have to shunt and fill that big truck, Thomas? She asked sweetly. Yes, puffed Thomas, but he doesn't want to be shunted. His name is... Before Thomas could finish, Hector opened his mouth and let out the biggest roar ever. Keep away, he bellowed. Rosie was so surprised that she shook from funnel to footplate, and she steamed straight out of the yard. This made Thomas cross. Hector had biffed and bashed Bill and Ben, he had shouted at Thomas, and he had frightened Rosie so much that she had puffed away. Now the extra delivery would never be ready. Thomas had had enough. He puffed bravely in front of Hector and gave him a mighty biff. Hector rolled backwards. He was very cross. Keep away, he roared. No, I won't, tooted Thomas crossly. You are causing confusion and delay. You really are horrid. Then with one mighty biff, Thomas sent Hector rolling backwards into a set of buffers. Hector crashed off the track. Thomas felt very bad. He hadn't meant to knock Hector over. Thomas puffed up to Hector. Hector lay on his side looking very sad. Now Hector didn't seem so horrid. I'm sorry I biffed you so hard, wished Thomas. But why don't you want to be shunted? Because I'm scared, moaned Hector. Why? Asked Thomas. I'm a new truck, he groaned, and I'm scared because I haven't been filled with coal before. I don't know what it feels like. That's why I didn't want to be shunted. Thomas was surprised. Later, Rocky and the workmen arrived and lifted Hector back onto the tracks. Thomas wanted to help Hector. Sometimes I'm scared when I have to do something new, he chuffed. But coal isn't scary. Hector watched as Thomas rolled under the coal hopper. Black, dusty coal poured into Thomas's coal box. When the dust settled, Hector saw that Thomas was smiling. See, it's not scary, tooted Thomas proudly. Now Hector was excited. I'd like to be filled with coal too, he rumbled. We must hurry, puffed Thomas. Thomas pulled Hector quickly under the coal hopper. Hector was quickly filled with coal. It felt wonderful. Then Thomas shunted Hector into place just in time. James and Edward puffed into the yard. They saw their waiting trains. James was very surprised to see Hector at their back.
"Well done, Thomas,"
snorted James. The trains were soon coupled up. James and Edward puffed away for their special deliveries. They were very surprised to hear Thomas whistle, "Good luck!" But the whistle wasn't for them. It was Thomas tooting to his new friend, Hector the not horrid at all. Thomas and the Spaceship. It was a foggy night on the Island of Sodor. The engine's lamps burned brightly, and the fog swirled and twirled around their wheels as the engines headed home. All except for Percy. A valve had come loose in his cylinder. Percy had broken down. Thomas chuffed in. "Hello, Percy," he tooted.
"Hello, Thomas,"
Percy peeped.
"Thank you for coming to help me."
Thomas buffered up to Percy, and they headed home towards Tidmouth sheds. The fog was thick. Thomas wanted to be quick. Suddenly, Percy peeped.
"Look, Thomas, there are bright flashing lights in the sky."
Thomas couldn't see any lights.
"It must be a spaceship,"
peeped Percy. "A spaceship?" puffed Thomas. "Are you sure?"
"Sure as I'm a little green engine,"
whistled Percy. He was very excited, and that made Thomas excited too. Thomas and Percy arrived at Tidmouth sheds.
"I've seen a spaceship,"
Percy whistled excitedly. "Pah!" snorted Gordon. "What a silly little engine!" Thomas didn't like Gordon calling Percy silly. The Fat Controller arrived. "Thomas, tonight you must take Percy's mail trucks." Thomas was happy to do this. Now he could find Percy's spaceship. "I'll show you that Percy isn't a silly little engine," Thomas tooted to Gordon. And he set off into the fog. Thomas chuffed to the top of Gordon's hill. He was looking for the spaceship. There, in the distance, he saw some flashing lights. "Hooray!" whistled Thomas. "There's Percy's spaceship." And he wheeshed down the hill. Thomas puffed closer and closer, but it wasn't a spaceship. It was a circle of workmen's lights. The workmen were fixing some broken track. Thomas was very disappointed. "I must find Percy's spaceship," he whistled. So he chuffed on through the fog. Then Thomas saw another flashing light. "Hooray!" he chuffed. "There's Percy's spaceship." Thomas puffed closer and closer. But it wasn't Percy's spaceship. It was the lamp in the lighthouse, flashing on and off. "Bother!" puffed Thomas. But he still wanted to find Percy's spaceship, so he puffed on through the fog. Thomas was very tired, and it was very late. He had searched everywhere. How was he going to show Gordon that Percy had seen a spaceship? Then suddenly he saw them. These flashing lights were moving in the sky. That must be Percy's spaceship, whistled Thomas. He was very excited. Thomas pumped his pistons and raced after the flashing lights. The spaceship was flying lower and lower in the sky. Suddenly, Thomas didn't feel tired anymore. Thomas's wheels clickety-clacked on the rails of the track to see Jeremy the plane coming in to land at the airport. "Cinders and ashes," cried Thomas. "Jeremy the plane must be Percy's spaceship." Thomas felt very sad. He hadn't found a spaceship. Worst of all, he had let down his friend Percy. Thomas puffed away. He was so tired, the mail trucks felt very heavy now. "The Fat Controller will be cross," sighed Thomas. "I've spent all night looking for Percy's spaceship." Thomas knew that now he couldn't deliver the mail trucks on time. He needed help. So he chuffed back to Tidmouth as fast as his aching axles would spin. When Thomas arrived at Tidmouth sheds, Percy was still at the fitter's yard. "How many spaceships did you find?" coughed Gordon grandly. "It wasn't a spaceship," puffed Thomas sadly. "It was Jeremy the plane coming in to land." Thomas felt very silly, but he still had to be really useful. "Gordon, I need your help," he tooted. "You are faster and stronger than any engine. If we share the trucks, the mail can still be delivered by breakfast." This made Gordon feel important, and Gordon liked feeling important. So Gordon took half the mail trucks, and Thomas took the others, until all the mail was delivered by breakfast. The next night there was no fog. "Look," tooted Thomas, "there's Jeremy the plane." He was very excited. All the engines watched Jeremy coming in to land at the airport. It was a magical sight. "I think Jeremy's better than a spaceship any day," peeped Percy, and Thomas had to agree.